Hi, everyone. We are going to talk about your Still Real assignment, which is due at the end of the Radical Americans module. So, for this assignment, you are going to choose some different examples of contemporary poetry, and you're going to examine how those examples are maybe influenced or represent values or features of realist poetry. And then you're going to compare them to the works of Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson. And particularly, you are going to examine how your contemporary examples might compare to the structure or the subject matter or the form or even the word choice of Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson. So you guys will see here on the assignment homepage that I have given you just a few examples of contemporary poets. This is not by any means what you are limited to. If you love poetry, you have some of your own favorite contemporary poets, you absolutely can use examples of those. But this is just kind of a starting place to give you an idea. Sherman Alexie and Ruby Carr are two of my personal favorite poets, and I would strongly encourage you to look into those works. But honestly, you cannot go wrong with any of these poets from this list. And if you want to dig a little bit deeper, you absolutely are welcome to do that. You can do a Google search of contemporary poets, and you'll find a plethora of examples. So I would definitely encourage you to go beyond this list if you'd like and find some contemporary poets that maybe you can relate to or their works really speak to you. So let's actually open up this assignment and let's talk through the different steps you'll take to complete it. So, like I said, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to find 5 different poems that were written since 1975, and each of these poems should represent some type of aspect of realism. So some of those things could be a focus on everyday aspects of life. It could be subject matter that seems kind of odd for a poem, surprising word combinations, a form that fits the content, or creative use of punctuation. So those are just a few things you can consider, but you will need to have 5 examples of those poems. And so whenever I say contemporary, that's really what I mean, since 1975. Now, some of you might find examples of poetry that was written prior to 1975, like Maya Angelou, for example, wrote a lot of her poetry around that time and even a little bit before then. And that's okay. As long as I would say it's been written since the 1950s, I think we're good there. So you will need to find 5 contemporary poems to use as an example. So what you're going to do is you will need to copy and paste those examples into either a Word document or like a PowerPoint presentation or Google Slides presentation. I would encourage you to do Google Slides. I think you have a little bit more freedom to really kind of zhuzh up your presentation that way. But if you prefer to work in a document, that's absolutely fine as well. But you'll need to set that up, and I would recommend creating a slide, at least one slide for each of your poems. And the next thing you'll want to do is you need to explain each poem's connection to realism. So remember this list here that we looked at on step 1. This is really what I want you to discuss. In your poem, your contemporary poem that you've chosen, how exactly does it fit the features or the aspects of realism? So that's step 3. And then step 4, I want you to explain how each poem was influenced by either Walt Whitman or Emily Dickinson. So think about the features we've talked about of Whitman and Dickinson's poetry. Emily Dickinson talked a lot about harnessing our emotions and just like emotions in general. Walt Whitman talked a lot about some really taboo subjects like the human body and things like that. So that's just kind of a starting point to think about. Maybe also think about their specific word choice and their structure and compare that to the poems that you've chosen. So this is an example of what your assignment can look like. I have created a presentation here in Google Slides. So this could be like your intro slide here. And I've gone with a poem by Ruby Carr. A lot of her poetry is not titled. It's just published in a collection or an anthology of different poems. And she does have them organized in her anthologies by subject matter or theme, which is really great. But you guys will see here that this poem does not have a title. And a lot of her poetry also just kind of an interesting factoid about her works is that she includes a lot of illustrations with her work, and that's kind of common with contemporary poetry. So, a lot of her poetry, if you do a search for her works online, you'll find an image much like this one that I have pasted here on the left, and that's okay to include there. However, if your poet does not, or your poem, I should say, does not have this really nice, aesthetically pleasing image here, that's okay. You can just copy and paste the text of your poem into the slide. That's totally fine. So, what you absolutely need to have included here alongside the poem itself is an explanation of what elements of realist poetry this poem contains. So, again, think about the subject matter, think about the structure, the form, the word choice, the punctuation, all of those things that were listed in step one in the assignment. And then your second question that you're going to answer for each poem is, how does this poem reflect Whitman and or Dickinson's work? So you could choose either Whitman or Dickinson or both, depending on if you see features of both poets in your contemporary poem example. So you're going to think about the same things, really: the subject, the structure, the diction, those features that we've talked about in Emily Dickinson and Walt Whitman's works. I really want you to think about those and compare how your contemporary example supports that. Now, you can have all of this information on the same slide if you would like, or if you would like to do multiple slides and answer each of these questions on them, that's totally fine as well. You have the creative freedom to organize this as you see fit, but absolutely at bare minimum, what you have to have for each of your contemporary poem examples is the poem itself. I want you to have a written explanation of how this poem supports or compares to features of realist poetry, and then how this poem reflects the works of Whitman and or Dickinson's works. So specifically cite those features in both of those. It would also be helpful if you have a longer poem to give me an example from a line that supports the features you're discussing in each of these. All right. So once you have found all of your examples and you are ready to submit your assignment, please make sure that you go up to the Share Settings button and make sure that your settings are set to services.live. And when we have done that, we are ready to submit our assignment.